Tēnā rā hoki tātou katoa. E te whānau koutou e mā takitaki mai ana I tēnei punua pāho. Ai, kua hau tēnei ko Matutaera. Kua hoki mai mo te wāhanga tuarua. I'm back for episode 2 of Te Kura Arotea. Can we talk for a minute? And I'm going to take a few minutes to have a koorero with our two guests today. And man, awesome to have our two guests. We're going to be talking about whakapapa. Yeah, whakapapa, but it's in the past e te whānau. And today we're having a conversation about intergenerational trauma, understanding intergenerational trauma, and really how we can address intergenerational trauma. Nō reira, he mihi nui tēnei kia kōrua ngā manuwhiri kua taimai. Our first guest e te whānau is from the mighty West Coast the most, ko Natasha, Willison, Reardon. Tēnā koe hoa.
Tēnā koe.
Os whakamārama mai ko wai koe hiaha hoki tō mahi.
Ai ora, ko orangi whao te maunga, miti wai te awa, ko te kōraha te pā, ngā te mahita. Natasha, Willison, Reardon, tōki te ingoa. Tēnā koe. I'm a life coach, probably maybe kairongo, whakarongo. Whakarongo is what they usually say, is someone that sits and just listen that without judgment.
Kai whakarongo. I love that as a mahi. Tēnā koe, Natasha, kia ora e hoa. In our second manuwhiri this morning, ko Dr. Rawiri, Waretini, Karena. Tēnā koe e hoa. Whakamārama mai mo te whānau e hoa. Ko wai koe, no whea koe, kia hoki tō mahi.
Kia ora te whānau, e mihi atu kia koutou. Koeo, ko taupiri rawa ko karioi o ku maunga, ko whanguro o moana, ko waikato o ku awa, ko Tainui o wapu, ko Ngāti Mahanga, ko Ngāti Mauta, ko Ngāti Wairiri o ku iwi, ko Koehakana tuku marae, ko Rawiri, Reardon Karena. O tuku mahi, kore a mio ohe o te kupu ki roto te reo pataparawa, engari te executive sales, te mana energy. So I'm from a kupapa Māori energy company, ko te mana. And so we deal in solar power and solar power water desalination technology. We are in partnership with Galtech in Germany and Moltech, which is in China. And we address things like water scarcity. And we've combined two technologies together. One is the solar power and the other is desalination. And what the desalination does, it uses the hose, it's about 350 meters, it goes into the sea. And what it does, it sucks the water into the desalination machine. It removes all the salt, it removes all the sediment and all the microbes, and it puts out pure drinking water, potable drinking water. And so one of our machines, it does 55,000 litres per day. Medium does 180,000 litres per day. And our big machine does over 1 million litres per day.
Some future tech mahi going on there, Dr. Rawiri, and it's awesome to have you here. And, the reason we've brought you both in is because, this conversation around intergenerational trauma, it's an important one. And, I know with Rawiri and, watching your TED Talks, I got to learn about, some of the things you've studied and, some of the information that you've gathered around why our people end up at the bottom of all the statistics, or at the top of all the statistics for some of them, right? But what I really want to, I suppose, discuss with you, Rawiri, is what has actually happened in our past, to our tupuna, and how has that actually impacted, and how is that continuing to impact us now?
Professor Karena-Waretini. Now, she is a Chok or Native American and the foremost authority on Indigenous experiences of historical intergenerational trauma in the world. And she defines style with intergenerational trauma is the genocide of an Indigenous people or their lives and their ways of living and experiencing the world. So it wasn't just about taking their lives, but destroying the culture, the heritage, the identity, the whole.
So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
We're talking about the intentional
Yeah.
mahi, or the intentional, I suppose, actions
Yeah.
that the colonials took when they were colonizing not just Aotearoa,
Yeah.
but colonizing all of the indigenous lands of the world.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're saying that they had an intentional way that they wanted to treat all those indigenous people?
Yes. Well, it came out of the Doctrine of Discovery. And so one of the things I talk about in TED Talk that previous to what's known as the precipitation of the Christopher Columbus voyages, or what happened after that, a lot of the European powers wanted to do very similar. And so what they did was they started going out and engaging with indigenous nations. But when they got there, they found other European ambassadors. So they got together and then they developed this legal tenet for engaging with indigenous people. Now, for them to gain legal authority, they needed the sanction of the most powerful organization in the world. And at that time, that was the Catholic Church. And so what happened is the Catholic Church sent out what's known as a series of papal decrees, legal tenets of Pope. And so what happened from there is those legal tenets or papal decrees became basically the foundations of international law. And one of them is called Romanus Pontifex 45. If they were to go and engage with indigenous peoples and indigenous lands that they weren't Christian, they were to be invaded, they were to be vanquished, they were to be subdued, reduced to perpetual slavery, to have all their properties and possessions seized by that European monarchy. The other one is Karena-Waretini 1493. If they were to go to indigenous lands and there were no people on there, they could claim that land on behalf of the European power they represented. However, if they were indigenous people and they weren't Christian, they had their right of entitlement to the land removed. And so they were given the rights of occupation. So what that meant was that their status as a human was lowered to that of a tree or a weed or an animal. So they became known as flora and fauna. And so that's what, in fact, that's a really old law. It's based on old Roman law, and that was actually applied all around the world, in America and Africa and Australia, and also here in Aotearoa in the South Island.
Wow. I heard you talking about they get reduced down to the same as an animal. And I remember watching a documentary called, oh man, I can't, it's one about Australia being colonized.
The Stolen Generation.
The Stolen Generation, that is the documentary. And they actually say that they were classed as flora and fauna. And now I get it. It was from this Doctrine of Discovery that determined that.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is that when we look at oranga tamariki, for example, they were created for the health and safety or well-being of the children. But when you look into the whakapapa of it, it wasn't established here in New Zealand. It was actually established in England through the House Commons Select Committee on Aborigine. Now, because the British Empire, they colonized more indigenous nations than any other European power, what they did was that they put this group together. They were made up of ministers in the House of Commons and missionaries. And it was their responsibility for developing an assimilation template, and they applied across the Commonwealth. And so therefore, they were the ones who were responsible for establishing the Aboriginal statutes, which led to the Stolen Generation. They were the ones who were actually specifically responsible for creating the Indian Act in both Canada and the USA. And that led to residential schools where over 10,000 children went missing. They're still missing to this day. And they also created Māori experiences of Stolen Generation through the Native Department 1861, through the Neglected and Criminal Children Act 1867. That's really important because that's the forerunner of the Fifth Act and the Oranga Tamariki Act.
Wow.
And they also created the Native Schools Act 1867. Now, when you look at Māori experience of child abuse, domestic violence, it actually all come from out of that act. I'll tell you what, if you had a stone and it represented a Native Schools Act, you drop it into a pond and it creates ripples. And the first ripple, what happened, it made the language illegal. And the next ripple, what happened, it was implemented by the state with the education department and the religious institutions. And the next ripple, what it did was it gave them legal justification for beating and abusing our tamariki mokopuna for speaking their native language. And the next ripple, what it did was over generations changed the status of our tama, āriki, mokopuna, of tauna, treasure, to commodity. And the next ripple, what it led to is the abuse, neglect, and death of our tama, āriki, mokopuna at the hand of their caregivers over generations. Now, we know the names. Elsia Whittaker, Nea Glassy, Mokomok, James Whakaruru. What this country does is it focuses on the outcomes of why things happen, but this is the whakapapa of it, where it came from. And so when you're addressing the government, I'll tell you what the deficit outcomes are and what our people have been subjected to. But then we say, well, let's contextualize it. Here's the whakapapa, and it leads all the way back to legislative policy. And thank you.
Wow. And what I can see there too, Rawiri, is that we can trace the responsibility
Yes.
of what's actually happening now and the impact of what's happening now all the way back to that, right?
Yes.
And more, I see them pointing the finger at us.
Yes.
They're pointing the finger at us like, that we're to blame for putting ourselves in this position.
Yeah.
But what I can hear you saying clearly is that this was their intention, determined by the Doctrine of Discovery from the 1400s.
And it's also, you can tell it was intentional because the same thing happened to every other Indigenous people around the world.
Tika.
And so you're talking about a mass genocide of hundreds of billions of Indigenous nations around the world for the last 700-800 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't say that, that has happened, but it's not intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's no mistake.
There's no mistake
by mistake,
that Indigenous people across the world. I went to Whipsy and I presented this in Whipsy.
Yes.
Now, after I finished, I had people get up from Hawaii, from Australia, from Argentina, from Brazil. They all spoke different languages, but they said the same story. Loss of language, loss of a culture, loss of identity, loss of heritage, discrimination by oppressive powers. The exact same story.
Yes. Oh, man. And the impact is the same on the whānau throughout the generations.
Yes.
We're talking about, intergenerational trauma. And, when I was visiting LA, it was like when I was younger, I met all these Mexican brothers there. And they said to me, man, that Once for Warriors movie, that's our movie. Yeah. That's our story. Same story as us. Yeah. So that tells me that the brothers over there experience the same things as us here through the Doctrine of Discovery being, enforced on them over there as well.
Well, the story of the African American, because it's all ours and theirs, the same thing. It was done by the same people. Yeah. They were subjected to Romulus Pontifex. In fact, when you have a look at what's happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, it's Romulus Pontifex.
Yes. It's the same thing happening again, right? Like taking over that nation and that lands from those people. And, wow. Oh, man, Rawiri, I could talk to you about this all day, but I think it's a good time to head over to, to Natasha because, you and your mahi, one-on-one coaching people to create lives they love, I can only imagine that you are dealing with a whole lot of intergenerational trauma with the people that you're coaching and the people, that you're really supporting. Yeah. So how does that, how do you deal with that when people come to you and they're trying to create lives they love, yet there's all the stuff that they're dealing with from previous generations too?
Yeah, I think, Rawiri's, listening to his koorero, it definitely was triggering. So a lot of my stuff around my thesis as well is around traditional practices, around mind, wellness, health. And I kept going on this journey thinking, trying to look for something like, what did our tupuna do? They must have had these, models in place were around when our whānau weren't feeling the greatest and all these things, everything. It kept going around in circles and it just kept coming back to karakia. And I was like, I know this stuff, but it's sitting right there in front of me. I was looking for something else because I was looking at westernized models and, and trying to match things up. And I realized, geez, karakia, like, I know this. This is how I've been brought up all my life. Everything we do, get in the car, do all these things, karakia, come in here today, karakia. And then I started to, see that as the whānau came through, that a lot of that was really like the fundamentals of that was missing. And when I talk about intergenerational trauma, when I'm working with whānau, it's the themes I see come through. It might be, someone brings up about, I don't feel Māori and, I can't learn the reo. I've been trying this for the last 10 years and this hasn't been coming through to me. And that's how I see the impacts of intergenerational trauma is through this belief that our whānau feel like they're either not enough. There's this epidemic in this world that we're not good enough, we're not enough, that I'm never going to get that, I don't know how to do this. And I'm not saying all of us are like some of us have a space where, my parents, it was important to get into the education because my father used to say that where power is too, you get this knowledge and stuff, and you can start to work with those in spaces. They was really pushed, there's 10 of us in my whānau, pushed us into education. And the reason I've gone to that is that when I sit with people, I hear someone's intergeneration, that hurt come through the coaching session, depending on what the themes are that come out of it. It could be about real, not feeling Māori enough, that they feel whakamā about being in spaces because, they don't know the reo or they weren't brought up around their marae. And those are the fundamental things that come through, and then there's other stuff that's around it. So, that to me is the way that I understand that this trauma has been passed down. Like she realised she'd gone away and come back. But you know what? I learnt that my great nana was beaten for speaking the reo, all these things that she learnt after being in a session and came back, and she was like, that is that intergenerational stuff that I feel the mama of my nana coming through me. And so every time she goes to learn the reo, she gets so overwhelmed inside her and stuff. She said, all I want to ever do is just cry. Well, that's the stuff that's been passed down through us, and it's not in a bad way. It's something that you hold that has happened to your nana. That's the connection back to, to your whakapapa. So, that theme work is how I can identify everything gets passed down through some way, and I absolutely believe that, because I believe some of my behaviours come from the trauma that my parents and my grandparents have experienced, and I respond inside the same way. And it's not until I understood about the response, how the body tells you about history, that I could make that connection.
Yeah. And man, thank you for sharing that. And what's really interesting is that our bodies do tell us, that these experiences and these memories that we have are actually in our bodies. And a lot of us, like, we don't acknowledge them, right? And I think this is part of what we do, the bottling it up. I mean, my kids came back from the movies on Friday. They went and watched Inside Out Part 2. And so this is helping them to understand their feelings and emotions and how they impact themselves, right? And I think, that's a lot of what you're dealing with too. And especially when you shared about, oh man, I feel so guilty that I can't speak te reo. And that I feel so guilty when I'm trying to learn how to speak it. And it's because of those previous experiences that the tūpuna had in their time, right?
I really believe that. I really believe that those things are, and when we can understand it and we can understand because it becomes a coping mechanism, and coping mechanisms are good. Like someone might have dealt with something at the age of 4 and they develop a coping mechanism from that experience. But sometimes when they're in their 60s, that coping mechanism of that 4-year-old is still driving them at 60, which is no longer favourable anymore.
Yeah.
And when they start to learn, hey, that's why I behave like this, there's more of a sense of aroha, self-love, those sorts of things that come through, because often people will say self-love, oh no, we're told not to rave about the kumara. And I said, sometimes we're taking context out of things because our tupuna would have never ever said, hey, learn to love yourself so you can love even more to people that you want to share your experience with. So, I really think it's all definitely connected, and it was really good because Rawiri sort of brought back my experience as I'm going through my thesis writing. He's brought up things that, those historical things that I've been learning about to bring them back to this space of the work that I'm doing with whānau is powerful because it's coming from them. They're learning about this so that they can take this tool for free and utilize it with their whānau. They can do that one whānau at a time. I think I'm doing my name.
Yeah, awesome. And what I'm also getting to is that doing it one whānau at a time is doing it each individual in that whānau at a time too. That we can't actually have whole whānau conversations to transform each individual, but each individual can do that, right? When that's what you're saying, that's what you do. You do the one-on-one coaching with these whānau members. And what kind of whānau, like what kind of people are coming to utilize your services?
Like when I first started with Māori Women's Development Corporation about 10 years ago, my view was to go to work with Māori women and Māori whānau going into business because that's what they wanted. They wanted henepreneurs, they called them, to go out and do this mai with the families and help them set up their business, but also give them the coaching to get rid of some of those doubting beliefs and stuff that they can't do these things that, it's out of reach. Actually, it's in reach.
Yeah.
And so, the whānau the youngest I've worked with is 8 years old, and the eldest, she was 89.
Wow.
So I've worked with, I do one-on-ones, but also I've worked with families, done work with whānau. So I'll do mahi with them, but I'll also do individual sessions with them too. Because once they've got that, that's why I think it's important that I was told, you're a kaiwhakarongo, you're there to listen without judgment. Because when you can listen without judgment, people start to let go some of their barriers, or they open to trust that actually I can let down a little bit more.
Yes.
And then they'll start to see that when you can get things out of here and out to the out, it's like magic. Like it's a freedom is like you lose 20 kgs just like that from just expressing and knowing that someone is not going to go over and say, oh, how did you hear that? That there is no judgment. Like people can talk about, I've heard some pretty out of it stories. I mean, things that people have done. But the fact to sit there and just listen and not judge them, understand that they can unpack their own trauma. Because trauma isn't what's happened there. It's the response to what's going on inside from that event. So it's not really the event can happen 10 years ago.
That's right.
It's not the event that's happening again that's showing up in your body. It's the impact of that inside you. So when people start to get that, it's like, I get this yucky feeling every single time. First time you ever felt that, you go back to the whakapapa of it, and we can go back and they'll go, I don't know, but then they'll go, but this happened to me when I was 5. How did you respond to that? So it just unpacks, and then they get so good at unpacking their own. This happened to me then. Not happening now, but I'm still responding the same way. So that's why. I'm stopping myself from actually really living this life that we need to. Entitled to, really. We are.
What I'm hearing there, it's amazing. What I'm hearing is that the choices we make as tamariki, dependent on how we were treated, what was said to us, or, really what our experience was, that will stay with us forever unless we actually go back and address it again. And we go back and say, man, why do I feel this way? Just like you said, why do I behave this way? And what I'm actually getting is, we're programmed that way, that, when we're little, this is the first time we had that experience. So we programmed ourselves to behave a particular way when that experience happens, and that might be shut down. That might be escape. That might be whatever it is, but that's still going to be with us, right? For our whole lives, right? Unless we actually go to someone like you who can help us to unpick, man, how come I always do this?
Yeah.
How come I'm single again? Why have I divorced for the third time?
Yeah.
You know, well, why?
Yeah, and exactly that. And when they get to that 4-year-old and they start to share love with, wow, that was exactly the right way to deal with things right then when I was 4. And now I'm 60, you can start to say, hey, 4-year-old me, all right, it's not,
Yeah.
you know, it's all right, I can deal with this. Now I'm 60 and I say to people, you might think, oh, what? Talking to myself. I'm like, but if you're free, and it's so powerful. I've seen it with hundreds of whānau that when they, address and love the time that those things happened and acknowledge their age and let it be, that there's so much freedom. They just are able to see the world. So I really love the work. It's simple, but it's not. I mean, it's easy, but it's not. It's simple, not easy. That's it. It's simple, but it's not easy because it is simple. It's about koorero. You don't have to change anybody else in your world. You just have to change the way that this thing works, the thinking, the whakaaro thing, and your whole world can really change.
Man.
It takes a lot of work. Even me as a coach, sometimes my husband's like, oh, that's not very coachy. And then I was like, well, I am human, you have to deal with those things, learn to coach yourself as well. Because, if I can't do it right and I'm not doing what I'm teaching, then I'm not authentic. Like, come on, coach yourself through this, what's going on inside you? Where's that trigger come from that's making you think this is happening?
Yes.
That I have these, what I tell whānau about, it's like you have this reticular activator in your head and that tells you, it's like a detective, like you might say, oh, every time I go to this party, that lady always gives me the evils. And so every time you go there, guess what you see?
It's going to be there.
You're just going to see her giving you the evils because your reticular, your brain is just looking for that stuff.
Yeah.
But when you start to say, I'm going to look for a time where she doesn't look at me like that, you will start to see that too. And then you'll start to see, oh, no, it's not all the time.
Yeah.
Actually, I've got this belief in my head that it is.
Yeah.
I'm just learning those little tools about, go back there and see if she's really doing that.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, she wasn't. It's not all the time, but your head is saying all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I can hear too is that we start to create a relationship with ourselves where we can check ourselves, where we can actually check in on ourselves. We can actually check, hey man, is that actually true? What I believe? Because this might be the 4-year-old that's actually coming up right here.
Of course.
So I'll have another look at it.
Yeah.
I get it. And what I actually heard too was that whatever we expect, that's what we get.
Yeah.
We expect somebody to turn up the way that they've turned up the last 10 times.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
But it's that past experience that has us determine this is who they are. I've got a conclusion now about this person. I've got a judgment. I've got an assertion about them. This is how they are all the time.
Yeah.
Always a nosy.
Yeah.
So as they turn up,
yeah.
Oh man, this reminds me of my 2 little kids, right? So I got a 12 and 11-year-old, and man, this is what they do to each other all the time. Always blaming each other. It was them who started it. It was them who started it. It's like, man, this is what you guys are doing. But it really is taking that, I suppose, responsibility, right? It really is. And what I can hear you talking about is you provide a safe space for people to have these conversations. You'll ask the questions. You become that little person on their shoulder, just inquiring with them, right? Until they become that person on their own shoulder, when they can start inquiring with themselves. And as you said, coaching themselves.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful when they can get to a space of self-coaching. And, sometimes I'll see people weekly, then I might see them 6 monthly.
Yeah.
Or might be 1 yearly. Like, there's always there's a pattern that once they've got a few sessions under their belt, that they've actually got these really good tools to be able to question and just ask yourself, is it absolutely true what I'm thinking?
Yeah.
Or is it because past things have happened and I've never really cracked it open to have a look at it and see whether it's just me or, we never can change anybody else outside of us.
Yes.
We can't change the way people act or, or what people say about us. But what we can do is we can start to visualize it differently. You can see it internally and look out differently because, hurt people hurt is what I got taught. And I know when I'm hurting, my husband's going to get it too.
Yeah,
You know,
people hurt others.
yeah. And so you know that there's mamae in there.
Yeah.
And people don't react or do things like that if there's anything going on.
Yes.
So you get to see them quite differently. Addiction, seeing that so differently.
Yeah.
Place of love.
Yeah. And what I'm actually getting to is that, you know, this like personal transformation that people get to have changes their whole world. But the only thing that's actually changed is their perception of themselves, their perception of others. Because you can create your perception of others. That's what you just said, right?
Yeah.
And your perception of the world. So what I'm getting is that at 4, we develop this perception like by default without even thinking about it. Something happens to me, I make the world cruel. The world is cruel because this cruel thing happened to me, right? And then I also say other people, they're nasty, you know, and I'm not enough. You know, that's usually this is like the 4-year-old's perception of the world, right? And as you said, I can be that 4-year-old up until I'm 60 years of age, still having those same thoughts.
Running
I'm
around.
not enough.
Yeah.
The world's nasty and they're bad people.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like a toddler running around with something, you know, and you're trying to stop them from hurting themselves or things. That's what happens in the brain. The brain just keeps tuning out because it's protecting you because at 4, that's how it protected you.
Yes.
So every time you get
that happen again. Right.
Every time you get that same feeling in your body, you will react exactly the same way without you even knowing. It's just by default.
Yes.
Because your brain is wanting to protect you.
Wow.
Hey, watch out. It's going to happen to you again.
Yes.
And then so you go into either shutdown or whatever it is, rage or, you know, anything that you do.
And this 4-year-old was a vulnerable little child. So, of course, that's what you're going to do, right?
Of course.
But
found the way to protect himself or herself at that time. So.
But the 40-year-old ain't. It's not vulnerable to that hurt anymore.
No.
But we think we are.
I think we are because of what's going on inside from that event, not the event.
What I'm hearing too is when we're feeling it inside us, this body's remembered it.
Yeah.
That's why we're feeling it in our body.
Yeah, we are. And that's why, you know, when you get a sickly or your chest gets sore, you start breathing really
when I'm anxious.
This memories, you know, it's taking you back into that space of things that had happened that created trauma for you. So trauma can be, you know, someone could say something to you. I remember an auntie saying to me, when I was little, hey, get home, don't follow me. And it made me feel like I was being rejected. And I never knew that until later on in life. I was like, where do I get this rejection over please people and people please and do all this stuff so I don't get rejected?
Yes.
And then, you know, my coach took me through that. And I came to the spot where it's like, no, you just did. Because she just not finished getting a tap around by the uncle and she didn't want me following her home.
Yes.
Just in case he came back. But I thought she was rejecting me, but she wasn't. She was trying to protect me.
Yes.
So as an adult, it was, hey, just over, please. People don't reject you.
Yes.
You know, do all this stuff, you get exhausted. But no longer anymore. I'm like,
wow.
Me is rejecting me, not anybody else.
And I'm getting how much it impacts our behavior.
Yeah.
Right? We've got to be a particular way now. Because if we be that way that we really are, by being who I really am, then I'm going to get hurt.
Yeah, of course.
So I need to be this other way because this way doesn't get hurt.
Yeah. You won't get rejected.
Oh my goodness. I just discovered something for me. Yeah. I think that's probably why I always try to be a wise, clever guy who knows a lot of things so that people can go, oh, you're valuable.
Yeah.
You know? I need you in my team or my
and it's not a bad thing though, because if we come from a place of love, to self-love ourselves for those things, because you didn't know anything different.
No.
So we developed these things and it's survival. It's about surviving in spaces, making sure that as humans, we just want to be connected.
Yeah.
We just, especially, I just found out that there's a communal gene that only Indigenous people have and stuff. And that made me really understand a lot of the work I'm doing with our people and how that affects what's going on for us because we're so individualized in our own homes with our own whānau now, not in that real concept of collectivization. That there's real science that talks about that blows me away that I'm like, hey, our tūpuna would have known all that because that's how we live. So anyway, I'm getting off course.
Oh, man, this is right on course because you spoke earlier about our tūpuna must have done something and then you were like, karakia. What I'm getting, you know what our tūpuna done? they created villages. That's what they did. They had a whole bunch of people who would be there to support you, to guide you, to look after you, to example you, to show you. Like, not just mum and dad, not just nana or auntie. Hey, you got like uncles, aunties, older cousins. You've got a whole village. And this is what's missing. This is what's actually missing. That's how come we're in the predicament we're in, because it's every man for himself. And this is the whakapapa, right? This is exactly what they were trying to break us down into, these individuals.
What you're talking about is called epigenetic research. It's called epigenetic. And so what that means is that our trauma can pass from one generation to the next, and it's through your cellular memory. And so what I saw this research, and it was done on mice. And so there were 7 generations of mice. They were subjected to 2 things, perfume and fear. And so what happened is the next generation showed fear, 3rd generation showed fear. And what happens, only the 1st generation was subjected to perfume and fear, but the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th generation were only subject to perfume, but all of them showed fear. And so this research on this doctor, she was in Israel, her main, Rachel Yahuda's in it. And so she did research into those who were subjected to Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and the Holocaust. And what happened is that the people there, those who were subjected to the Holocaust, their descendants were showing the same symptoms, and they did research into their DNA, and there's called the stress gene with FKBP5. And what happened is they found that the descendants were showing the same symptoms as survivors, is because it was passed one generation to the next. And so it can also be passed from mother to child. And what I've also seen too is that it can be passed to strangers. And it can be passed to strangers through live organ donation, where people end up having the same memories, the same experiences as those who passed. It's because it's all in the cellular memories.
It's in the cells. Wow. And what I just got from you, then Rawiri too, was the cellular memory is actually the cells in our body, right?
Yes.
And I remember it's Dr. Bruce Lipton.
I like Bruce.
Man, now he's got some cool ass videos, and now I'm getting what he's on about. That these experiences we don't actually have to have.
No.
Someone before us had these experiences, but those are handed down to us through our genes. So this just like, wow, because I think I'm traumatized by the sound of cars on the road or the train on the road.
This is what we also can understand. For me, trauma is the 2-sided coin. On one side is the mamae and the pain, and the other side is the resilience. And so what that actually means is that you can sit in the pain side and actually still feel the mamae and pass it on. But the other side, the flip coin, is the resilience. What that means is that you overcome in spite of. You thrive in spite of. And so that's why I like the koorero is you are not your trauma. It is your body experience. So I've done similar mahi there the last 20 years.
Wow, just for your own self, right?
Oh, I've worked in, I was the facilitator alternatives to violence in prison. And I was the head of research at Tu'ohomai. And so we developed programs here. And so we also developed programs for correction. And it's called, you're a seed born of great descendant from lines of Jesus. That's who you are, first and foremost.
Wow. And a lot of that mahi you created for those spaces, that all came out from your doctorate and from your studies too. Wow. Oh, awesome, Rawiri. You know what I can actually hear and what both of you are sharing right now is that we've got this source, of the trauma. Like, we were traumatized intentionally, right? And then we've got, for Natasha, like we can create spaces to actually talk about these things, to bring them up, to not like keep them bottled up and, keep them tucked away. And, if I refer back to the Inside Out movie again, we've seen the impact of what happens to this young girl after she bottles up all the emotions, right? just starts coming out in weird ways that we don't want. And a lot of the work that I've done with men in men's circles, like that's probably one of the hugest things I get from men is that, man, I need a place to share all the stuff so I don't go home and end up just like unleashing it on my whānau. Yeah.
Well, at the heart of Puma is actually disconnection. The disconnection, our wairua, our hinengaro, our tinana, our taiao. And so really, the rongoa is reconnection.
Oh, man. And as simple as that might sound, it's not actually that simple to reconnect people is what I'm, this is what I'm experiencing myself. Even connecting myself with my own tamariki. I find that really difficult. I know they find that difficult. And so what are some of the ways that we can create spaces where we can actually reconnect with people? Like, what's the trick here? I think that's the challenge, eh?
Well, I did research for my into reconnection spaces for the Tinder Communities project. And so what we actually learned was for first and foremost, we whakapapa all the way to io. All that's being disconnected. But if you know that you whakapapa all the way up there, you aren't going to be treated like a slave.
Yes.
Yeah. And so if you can reconnect, our whakapapa, it's always there. I've sat in the Waitangi tribunal with the paparahi o te rahi. And one of the things that they said to the Crown is, this is our whakapapa. They went all the way from io, all the way down to the cosmos, to rangia papa, to all the aitua, right down to they said, okay, this is what authority I have in this land. Where's yours? Yours starts at 1840. That's different.
Wow. And so what I'm getting here, bro, is knowing who we are, knowing that we are from the source, knowing that we are the source ourselves.
Wow. And that's what they wanted to disconnect us from.
That's what I just got when you said we can't be a rangatira when we put ourselves right down there. But if we know we go all the way to io, there's only one way to go.
Yeah. They spent generations disconnecting us because it's easier to take land resources and assets from those who don't know they actually inherently own it.
Wow. So they convinced us that we don't own it anymore.
So they convinced us,
just let it all go.
Wow.
This is amazing, Rawiri. What I do want to acknowledge you for both is, you're just how authentic you've been in this conversation, and just really bringing, your depth of knowledge and experiences to, I suppose, help our whānau understand, what we're dealing with in terms of intergenerational trauma and, just an opportunity for yourself too, Natasha, to, to bring anything you think would make a difference for our whānau listening right now. Who are dealing with intergenerational trauma, who may not even know they're dealing with intergenerational trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, just, I guess, just learning about self-love and acceptance. I know that people say, well, that doesn't sound really Māori, but actually it is. It's like, whoever taught us not to actually learn about being okay about who you are, with all your imperfections and all the great things, everything in there. It's just how we're meant to be, and by just starting to accept that. And one of the key things that I always got told was, other people's perception of you is none of your business. When you get out of that space of other people's business, and get back into your own, just allow people to say what it is they need to. Just work on what it is that you need to be starting to say about yourself. Like, what are the key things that you are saying about yourself that you're not good enough? I'm never going to be able to do this, come from this, and it's always, or money in and money out, whatever those beliefs are, that actually they can change. Those values were passed on to you, and you can actually change, start to see the world in a different way.
This is beautiful. Yeah, what I'm actually getting is that we can create our own declarations about who we are. Similar to what our tupuna Tawhiao done when he created his tongikura. And he says, this is the prophetic future I'm creating, not just for me, but for my mokopuna to come. And I'm like, man, maybe that's where we need to be, creating our own tongikura for our
definitely.
Well, the kingitanga is the very example of overcoming trauma. When you actually look at, what happened to the wolves and how they actually overcame it and they reemerged as the people. from having your land stripped to, to this government having to pay recompense for over the 1.5 million of acres of land. But it wasn't just land. It's resources, assets, it's minerals, it's gold. Yeah, there's way, way more than what is even being suggested.
And I love how you're, highlighting kingitanga as an example of that. And one of the reasons I can see that is for the man I just mentioned, Tawhia. He created a prophecy for us to live into, right? And he actually said, Mā kue hanga tōku nei whare. I'll build it myself out of whatever limited resources I do have. It might be a mahoe and a patete. It's not going to be a kauri and a tōtara.
Yeah.
But I'll make what I need to make from whatever I've got, right? And I'll make it work for me. Like, it's beautiful.
I use that tongi kura in my PhD. And for me, what he was saying there is, our house will be rebuilt, it will be restored, not necessarily by the chief and the politicians, but by the power of the common people. Yeah. Because when you look at the mahoe, the hino, the patete, those aren't rangatira trees. And they're the common trees that grow in abundance. The difference is this: when you subject them to pressure, they bend, they're resilient, just like our people.
They're resilient, just like us. You've just created who we actually are, Rawiri, and reminded us, that's where we can stand, and that's where we can bring everybody together, and that's who we can be for our whānau. Nō reira, he mihi nui tēnei ki a kōrero. I've loved this conversation and I've learned a few things about myself too in this conversation. Nō reira, kia koutou, e mātaki mai na koenei te whakamutunga o tēnei wāhanga tuarua. It's been awesome having you here, to have this conversation about whakapapa and about really how intergenerational trauma has impacted us and actually how we can create a world that works for us, how we can rebuild our world. Nō reira te whānau, tēnei te mihi whakamutunga kia koutou katoa. Make sure you fellas tune in for episode 3 of this awesome kaupapa e te whānau, te Kura Arotea. Can we talk for a minute? Mā te wā.